Um, I want to start out by reminding everyone that this meeting and all of our meetings are being recorded and posted to the Metro website. So please be mindful of that. I also wanted to thank those of you who have reached out to me over the course of this past week. It's always great to hear from you. This is such a knowledgeable group with so many really good, well-informed ideas that come from having spent a career in this field. I'm learning a lot, and as we move forward in this process, Dia and I and everyone on our team are just excited about getting a discussion going amongst all of you. It's very exciting as we sort of head into that stage of all of this. So earlier today, you all should have received a memo from Dia that lays out our process and presents a schedule. What we're looking for is over the course of this task force meeting, we want to come up with a wide range of solutions and a discussion of the problems that Nashville faces that we will work with community chairs to present to Mayor Cooper and the public in a 20 or 30 page report. And as you all think about these issues, we, of course, want you to be focused on things that Metro can and should do. And I know that Hannah, in particular, when she returns from maternity leave at the end of this month, definitely wants you to get very specific when it comes to solutions. We also want you to think broadly, though. I think what we're really trying to do here is come up with a framework for our community, something that identifies problems and solutions that Metro can address, but also that foundations, universities, and large employers can plug into as well. We've been talking a lot about focusing on things that can start immediately and on things that can occur in the next 1 to 3 years. A word I want to emphasize there is start. We want to take action now, but we want to create a framework that will frame the debate in Nashville for years to come. So no pressure, any of this. Turning to this evening's agenda, we're going to start by finishing the discussion that began last time and was focused on obstacles. And I just want to underscore that this is very much a first pass, which will roll into a deeper discussion as we move into committees. So we definitely don't need to rank solutions now. What we're really trying to do with this part of our discussion is almost like creating a heat map and giving you all an opportunity to work with each other and discuss things and work as a group so you can get a feel for that. Next week, we'll break into committees, and that'll allow all of us to get a lot more detailed when it comes to defining obstacles and talking about problems and developing solutions, and it'll make conversation easier as well. So thank you all for being part of this process. And with that, I will turn it over to Edward and Mick.
Great, thanks, John. Yeah, this, as you mentioned, this is our last big group meeting for a while, if you've had a chance to look ahead to the schedule going forward. So this will be a chance to bring those obstacles to the fore and then discuss them more, and the real work will really start beginning next week. And there's also a great presentation coming from planning, which will be really worthwhile and help us get all in the same playing field to start thinking about what the needs are out there. So I'm really excited about that. Ed, anything you'd like to add as we get started?
No, I know we have a couple of things on the agenda this evening, and to maximize our time and be able to have some discussion about that, I'll be extremely brief. Of course, thanks for everyone for joining us this evening for the important work we have in front of us. As a matter of form, I'll turn to you, John, really quickly. I've been scanning my screen in the participant list the entire time. But I don't know if I need to verbally call roll for all participants. If I do not, I have a log of all that are currently on the call, but I'll take direction from you if you believe for form I should go by name.
We do not need to call roll. I see the list as well. And if you've got a log, let's get into it.
Yep, great.
Fantastic. Well, Dia, I'll turn it over to you. Thanks for that, Don.
Great. Good evening, members of the task force and honorable members of the council. As John mentioned, we just need to close out on the initial activity that we did in last week's meeting. And so I'm just going to pull it up on the screen. And the last piece we really didn't have a chance to really get to was just identify what are some of the problems and obstacles in creating affordable housing and in preserving affordable housing that you all feel are important to begin to address. As John said, this is a first pass. This is just to get the conversation going. 7 weeks from now, it will be fun to look back at this and think about the simpler days of our conversation, because I know between now and 7 weeks, we're going to get into some really complicated issues. So what you should have before you and what was in your packet is the obstacles and challenges edited version. You will note as I move down that I have identified where items actually are solutions, outcomes, and conditions. They are not necessarily problems, and I will explain that in a minute. We last week built a working practical vision as a starting point to help us understand, really who's going to be our target market. And all the items that are in blue are a reflection of comments that were made by you all. So right now we have a working practical vision that talks about Nashville housing options for current and future residents that are affordable and available and accessible to all, regardless of income, race, ethnicity, religion, age, gender, sexual orientation, immigrant status, and ability. We raised about 5 questions, 5 additional items that we will want to take a look at as we move forward with the work of the task force. Issues around equity, issues around addressing housing stock and inventory, specifying that creation occurs near opportunities, jobs, and transportation. We flagged the issue around immigrant status, and also addressed the issue around quality of housing, that we want to see people thriving, not just surviving. So for this moment on the agenda, what we're really doing is to close out on the conversation from last week, is to highlight items that we can actually get around as important pieces of our work moving forward. As I mentioned, some of the items that were identified last week are actually solutions or conditions. So exclusionary zoning needs to be audited. That's something that needs to happen, but it's not a problem in and of itself. Adaptive reuse of metro land. It's something that needs to happen. It's not a problem in itself. So those are the items that are shaded in gray. What we're going to do right now is take a look at financing, because that, under creating affordable housing units, received the most amount of comments if we go all the way into the second page.
Dia, could I interrupt just one moment? Some members of the public are trying to find a link to be attendees, and could the tech side send me a link or do something so that they can get in and watch the meeting?
Don, can you send a link for attendees?
Yes, I can do so. Letting me send it to Kate Bowers.
That would be great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Sorry for the interruption.
All right. So as we look at this, what we really want to do is identify what are the issues, if we start with financing, that are priorities for this task force as a group to begin to address in the next 1 to 3 years. So I'm going to go down here. We have no appropriate incentives for for-profit developers. Is this something that the city should begin to work on in the next 1 to 3 years? I'm going to ask the co-chairs of the task force, Edward and Mick, to either identify people as they raise their hands, or folks can start unmuting, and we can do this carefully, but I encourage you to unmute as you need. But is this first one something that the city should address in the next 1 to 3 years?
I think Berkeley already has raised their hand. Way to be quick on that button, Berkeley. Go ahead.
Thank you for acknowledging me, Mr. Henley. Yes, I think this is something I've continued to hear from for-profit builders, that they would do this if we gave them the tool, and there are a couple of different options out there that several different council members are looking at. Some of those will require changes at the state level, and we have until the 10th to get captions described to some state legislators so we can do that. So I would love for us to pay close attention to that.
Good deal.
Why did we limit this to tax credit only? I mean, there are more incentives than that. Can we take that off, or can we create a second box that says other?
So, Mr. Latimer, that's a great point. Right now, we're going to just work with what we've got on this, but as we move into committee, would you please flag that issue? And I'm going to start going down this list on financing. And I'll ask Edward and Mick, the co-chairs, to be sure to flag some of these issues as members start to help us understand why these would be priorities in the next 1 to 3 years. How about the problem of expensive land, infrastructure costs, and building supplies? Is this something that we would want the city to tackle in the next 1 to 3 years? I got a thumbs up for Mr. Latimer, but unfortunately I can't see everybody else. So Edward and Mick, what you thinking?
Well, I see Jeremy he's raised his hand, so maybe he wants to comment on that, or maybe he had a previous comment, but I want to recognize him for raising his hand.
Absolutely. I think that's something that should be a priority to be looked at, because the land and infrastructure costs are one of the biggest impediments to doing affordable housing. So if the city can find a way to provide the land or make a mechanism available that would help do that, that would be tremendous.
Good deal. As we move down to pilots, inconsistently applied, is that something for the next 1 to 3 years to take a look at in terms of removing as an obstacle to creating affordable housing?
Hello, this is Leaky. Would you define pilots again? I know I've seen it, but I cannot recall what that stands for at this time.
Payment in lieu of tax.
Yes, okay.
This is Paulette Coleman, and I'd like some clarification on evidence about the inconsistent application.
That's a great question. And these are going to be the kinds of things that we'll get into on the committee, but I think this is a perfect question for right now, which is one of the members last week said pilots were inconsistently applied. And would anybody like to follow up on this to explain what the issue is and why this is a problem?
I don't know if this is what was being said at the time, but it might be, Dr. Coleman, in regards to that they're currently only available for LIHTC, low-income housing tax credit developments, and not available to other types of development. I'm not sure if that was the question being asked, but sorry. I'm not sure if that was the question being asked, but that might have been what the person who mentioned it was referring to.
Mick, this is Jeremy. It might also be that there were some tax credit program investments that were given back to the state because there wasn't a pilot approved for a development, and that's the only place that this has happened. Metro Nashville.
Yeah, I think that was right. Thank you, Jeremy. I think that was what was mentioned.
So does the task force see this as a problem that should be tackled in the first 1 to 3 years?
I think we would probably just reword that to say improve incentives or explore incentives for for-profit developers, tax credit incentives, property tax abatements, things like that. I think the issue is the wording. The specific wording leads people to different conclusions in their minds, and that's what's confusing people.
So right now, we've already highlighted no appropriate incentives for for-profit developers. So that's a problem, right? So we will skip this one because this one sounds like we need more information. We need more modifications to what it states here. So I'm going to keep moving.
Councilwoman Suara, I saw your hand, but I believe it went down. I didn't know if you wanted to comment or if your concerns were addressed by Kay's comments.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute. My concerns were addressed by Dia's comments because I wanted to say it relates to for-profit and not getting the same treatment, and we've already covered that in the first point. So,
very good. Thank you, Councilwoman Suara. Moving on to this next item, limitations of the Barnes Fund, no dedicated adequate funding source. Is this, do members of the task force see this as a priority item to be addressed in the next 1 to 3 years?
And Councilmember Berkeley, I see your hand, and then I see Gina's hand.
That hand was actually left over from the previous one. I was going to say that pilots kind of fit into what I was saying in the first item, but I will say on this one, currently the only dedicated funding we have is the taxes from short-term rental. 1 penny of that is dedicated to the Barnes Fund, and we have set a floor that we have to match whatever we do in economic incentives to for-profits. And you know, there are other cities that we hear about that have $60 million bond issue, but that's only once. So if we can do the equivalent on an annual basis, I think that would make us be as powerful as what other cities are doing.
No, absolutely. Gina, would you go ahead, and then Kay, I saw you raise your hand as well, and then Councilmember Suara.
Echo what Berkeley, Member Allen is saying. Agree that a more stable, higher dollar funding amount for the Barnes Fund would make it.
Gina, you're quite quiet from my computer. I don't know if other people are.
I couldn't hear her.
Hey, might be my computer.
Get near your mic or something.
I'm right on it. I said I agree with what Berkeley said, and I do think a larger dedicated funding stream would be important for the Barnes Fund going forward.
Go ahead, Kay, if you had comments.
What I would add is a predictable, dedicated funding stream. Predictable,
yeah.
Indeed. Councilmember Suara, and then Mr. Dean, I think I see your mic. So after Councilmember Suara, would you chime in, please?
When my hands goes up and then goes down, it means that what I wanted to say somebody has already said. And so to save us time, I'll just put it down so we're not repeating each other. But I was just going to say the exact same thing, that I do think we need more funding, and we do need, we had issue where it was impounded at some point. I think if we have a dedicated amount, we even need to increase it if we can. But when my hands goes up and down, just note that what I intend to say, someone already said it, and I'll save us some time by not repeating myself. Thank you.
No, perfect. Noted. Thank you for that. Mr. Dean, and then Eddie, I see your hand.
Yeah, this is one of the most important things we need to accomplish, is to create a reliable, dedicated funding stream to the Barnes Fund. But there's another angle here that's an embellishment of that that's really important, and that is that these not-for-profit developers that are building this housing stock for us need the benefit of 3 years or more of visibility into what those funding streams are going to be. Mm-hmm. The way we play now is we give them a grant this year, and what's going to happen next year, we'll tell you when you get there. And it's very difficult for them to optimize their capability to create new housing stock when they don't have 3-year visibility into funding.
Predictable.
Indeed. Eddie? Eddie, I don't know if your hand might just be just left over from the last comment, but Jeremy,
can you hear me now?
Yeah, there you go.
All right, it's just a pragmatic thought, but since we're still struggling with our budget and our annual cash flow in the state, it may be, if there's a way we could say we really want to focus on this in 2022 and we don't forget it. I just don't know what's in store budget wise and what's realistic in 2021. But I do think we really need to see it happen in 2022. So it's just a thought, pragmatic.
Agreed and well said, Eddie. I appreciate that. I don't see any other hands, Dia. If you wanted to keep moving, I don't see any other hands that have popped up.
That was a great discussion, and we all know that there are complexities involved with the decisions that the task force makes. And I think you've raised some of them about the consistency of available funding, about how to manage some of the short-term fiscal crunch with the long-term demand. I think these are very, very important points as we move forward, as you as a body, as the task force, come to decisions on how to pick what needs to happen in the first 1 to 3 years and after that. So we're going to do a few more of these. No available tax credit for Section 8 landlords.
That's an interesting.
I'm sorry. What's the rationale for the need for tax credits for affordable Section 8 landlords? Because they're already getting the difference between what their rent may be and the market rate. So I'm not sure what was the rationale. There is a dearth of Section 8 landlords, that's true, but I'm not sure how this will help.
Great question. We might need to dig deeper into that around the dearth of Section 8 landlords. If the real problem is the dearth, that's probably something we would want to discuss in the preserving committee, for example. But is there a task force member who would like to address this item?
To that.
Okay.
Dan Lane, a Section 8 landlord is not given an incentive to bring the amount up to market rate. It's a rate that they agree to with MDHA on the amount of rent, and then Section 8 pay a percentage of that so that the rental only pay 30%, but it's not market rate rent.
It gets complicated, Dia, and you know, HUD directs every year fair market rents by bedroom size, and so fair market rents, if you want to participate in Section 8, they can't go, you can't charge above that, and it comes under that category, fair market rents. But then within that, when you get into the weeds, and then there's negotiation between MDHA's Section 8 voucher department and how much they would agree to pay on behalf of that tenant in those situations. So it gets a little nerdy, so to speak.
Sounds like there's just a potential for a greater incentive there if we're talking about creation. Dr. Bethshin, I see your hand is raised. I wanted to make sure I acknowledged you.
Thank you. I just wanted to suggest that indeed we might need some incentives for Section 8 landlords, and it would also be useful to have local area fair market rents so that the rents varied that the Housing Authority could pay depending on the rents in the zip code or the census tract. But incentives such as a backup for security deposits if Section 8 landlords are worried about possible damage to units, things like that might be helpful.
I would maybe put this under the research side because that's what needs to be done.
Good deal. Great conversation.
I see a hand from Emil. Looks like he may want to speak before we move on.
Okay.
I was going to actually suggest that maybe is this really a problem or maybe a possible solution for the group?
I think that's a very important, which gets back to what Dr. Coleman said earlier, where one of the problem statements that seem to be clear is there's a dearth of Section 8 landlords. I think Dr. Sheen mentioned there is a need for incentives, but it might not be a tax credit per se, but it's really looking at some of the other mechanics around renting, like security deposits, et cetera. So I would suggest we do not highlight this item. And I'm looking at the clock. I think that what we've seen in this initial conversation is that there's going to be some good discussion in the committees around these kinds of items. And what's going to be important to this discussion in both committees is really around the data, and having the data help us understand and help us sort of establish some shared knowledge around what are the drivers in the marketplace and what are going to be some opportunities to make some changes. But the conversation tonight, I think, has been very helpful to understand where members of the task force stand on some of these issues and what will require further discussion and research. I think with that, what I'd like to do is turn the mic over to my colleague, Greg Claxton, because he's going to share a level set packet of data that will help to establish a foundation for the conversation moving forward in the committees. So I want to thank everybody for weighing in on this, and I'm going to turn the mic over to Greg.
Thanks, Dia. While I'm waiting to get the screen sharing privileges, I just want to note that I'm joined by my colleague, Nick Lindeman. He works for the research team in the planning department, and he's got a long experience doing demographic and economic analysis. So what I've pulled together are some of the data points that we discussed over the last couple of weeks. Okay, let me see. Okay, I'm shifting things around a little bit so I can keep an eye on everything. Okay. All right, this is some data that we've been able to pull together on these topics. Nope, wrong screen. On these topics over the past week. Some of it is stuff that we work with commonly. Some of it's stuff that we keep an eye on, but don't pull together into a presentation except occasionally. So I'm not going to kind of introduce it too much more, but just to jump in and say I'll kind of note where we've got caveats about the data or where it's a work in progress. So the core thing I wanted to start with was just overall population and growth trends. This is something obviously we work with a lot in planning, particularly going back to Nashville Next. A couple of things I want to note right at the start. Everything I'm about to show you, with one exception, is Davidson County. I'll note when it's national data only. The second thing is, I think pretty much everything in here is pre-COVID, pre-pandemic, pre-economic recession. So there's a lot of questions about how things are going to change over the next year or two, what the recovery looks back, how long it takes to recover, that kind of thing. We don't have a lot of insight right now. There seems to be a lot of forces pushing in a lot of different directions. But this is kind of the trends that we were on, the conditions that we were facing as of about February of last year. So just to start with, the population forecast, as y'all know, Nashville's been growing, Middle Tennessee has been growing rapidly for the past decade or so, and continuously before that. I always try to pull together a mix of projections to help emphasize that the future is still very uncertain, even if someone can put together a point or a line. Here I've got three. One is from the Greater Nashville Regional Council, our regional planning body. They use a long-range forecast to help with transportation planning. The second is from the State Data Center. That's a state body that helps counties and municipalities throughout the state do long-range planning, as well as the legislature. Those are both pretty close. In the past, we've seen them diverge, but these two projections wind up being pretty close. The third is from the GIS service that Metro uses. They're a firm called Esri. That's Geographic Information Systems. And they produce a 5-year forecast. I've extended it to get to 2025 so we can see how they line up. And as you can see, it's the orange line on top. Oh, I covered it. Oh yeah, there it is. Okay. It's the orange line on top. It's quite a bit more aggressive than the other two forecasts. One of the things we always grapple with is that with forecasts like these is they tend to revert to the mean. That is, they look at kind of historical trajectories and use that to inform things going forward. So it could be that we expect a lot of faster growth over the next 5 years, but that'll slow down and bring us closer to the line for GNRC or the state data center in the future. Still, it's worth noting when we did this exercise with Nashville Next, the projection that we used then, we've been growing faster than that over the past few years. So we expect a fair amount of growth in the near term, assuming kind of growth trajectory doesn't change too much from the pandemic and the recession, as well as fairly steady growth in the long term. For employment projections, we only have one shown here, and it's from GNRC as well. That's because employment projections tend to vary quite a lot depending on how you define employment, who you count as employed, people who are self-employed, how you count part-time jobs, that kind of thing. This is of note. Again, we expect steady economic growth over in the future. GNRC, when they commissioned their projections, they used 2017 as the baseline. That was their starting point. And you can see that even in the time since they commissioned that, there's already a divergence in terms of how many jobs we've added in Davidson County. Obviously, we're focusing on Davidson County here, but it is worth noting we are embedded in a larger regional housing market as well as a larger regional economy. So those are both factors at play. The numbers in terms of employment and population are pretty close, 700,000, a little bit more. But obviously there's a lot of people who commute in from other counties. There's a lot of Nashvillians who commute out, and there's a lot of our population who aren't employed because they're unemployed, their children, or they're retired or students. So, so generally, kind of the trend that we were on was obviously very rapid population or employment growth. We see that in kind of our Davidson County being below the national average for the past 7 years. It continued through 2019. In terms of our unemployment rate, it got extremely low. But then obviously it's important to understand that not everyone experiences the economic success that Nashville had the same way. So we see kind of employment here, unemployment stratified in a bunch of different ways. Here I'm showing by educational attainment, where people with a bachelor's degree have in 2017 had an unemployment rate of below 2%, which is astonishingly low. Whereas folks who did not graduate from high school or get an equivalency had an unemployment rate over 8%. Similarly, if you look at race and ethnicity, the non-Hispanic white population in Davidson County had an unemployment rate of 3%, double that for African American workers, and then almost double that for Hispanic and Latino workers. So again, just to say we've had a tremendous amount of economic success, but it hasn't been shared evenly. Looking ahead, kind of another way of taking a look at what the future economic situation might be. This is the national data. This is the national figures that I mentioned earlier. So this is not tied to Davidson County. But our sense is that the overall trend seems to hold here as well. And so what I'm showing, I'm going to start with the graph. And what this shows is what the Bureau of Labor Statistics, how they group job types into overall occupation. So office administration, production, sales, healthcare support managers. Though that's the very broad kind of categories that they're looking at here. And what this shows is the percentage is across the bottom, the median annual wage for that category of occupation. So it's got a lot of variation, but this is the middle point for each of these categories. And then how much we expect that to change on a percentage basis over the next 10 years from 2019 to 2029. And so a couple things, there are some areas that we expect to see decline, sales and office administration and production. Healthcare support is an incredible growth sector throughout the whole country. And then generally we see faster growing occupations tend to be maybe a little bit higher income. To try to simplify that a little bit, I grouped these occupational groups into based on that average or that median annual wage for occupations where the median was under $30,000 a year, between 30,000 and 70,000, and above 70,000. This is the table now on the left, showing the number of jobs. Again, this is nationally, how much we expect that to change and what the percentage change is. And I think what this conveys, what this sort of seems to intuitively convey that I think matches my understanding of how the economy is changing is fast growth for job categories that are under 30,000 annual wage, fast growth for job categories that are over 70,000 annual wage, but much slower growth for the middle income category. Now, I chose these breakpoints arbitrarily, so I don't want to put too much weight on this. But I also want to kind of flip back to the chart and think about that under 30,000 category, because what that looks like to me is a lot of variation. A lot of some employment sectors that are growing and large, some that are declining or not growing as fast. And so what that suggests is maybe a lot of disruption as well on the lower and in the middle income of the wage categories here. So shifting back to Davidson County, looking at household income, the chart on the left shows how median household income has changed. This is for the entire county in the blue line. We see steady growth from 2010 to 2019. And then breaking out by tenure for owners in orange. As you'd expect, owners have a higher median income than renters, which are shown in gray. Both are increasing. Renters are growing a little bit faster, but we think that the gap is actually widening somewhat there. On the right, we show the same thing, but breaking out by race or ethnicity of the head of household. So white alone, we see a fair bit higher than Black alone or Hispanic and Latino. One thing I'll note is that all of the census data that I'm showing is based on a survey for the Hispanic and Latino community in particular, because it's somewhat smaller in Nashville. It tends to be a little bit more noisy, so there's a little bit more year-to-year variation. So sometimes kind of the bump up that we see in 2019 there can be something that's really happening. Sometimes that can be just sort of statistical noise. So that's one where we might wait and see if that's a trend or just a momentary thing. This one shows monthly housing costs, again, broken out by owner and renter. This is what people report to the Census Bureau actually paying for their monthly housing costs. Obviously, at 2010, you see higher costs for owners than renters, but it's fascinating to see those converge. I think that's a dynamic that we're going to be talking about a lot one way or another throughout the next couple of months. And then kind of combining the income trends and the housing cost trends, these are trends in cost burden. So again, the blue line is kind of the overall average cost burden. That's the percentage of people who are paying more than 30% of their household income for housing costs. The blue line for everybody shows a slow but steady decline. The orange line for owners shows a steeper decline. And then the gray line for renters show some noise, but essentially flat over the last 7 years. Now, what that suggests is that people, there's a lot of renters who appear to have benefited from the economy. We see rising wages, but that's translating into higher rent rates as well. So the taking, you know, proportionally kind of a as large a bite out of householding renter incomes as it has been over the past 10 years. So okay, and so from there, I want to introduce the supply gap analysis. This is something that was done a few years ago in a consultant report for the mayor's office. We were asked a couple years after that to replicate it. So this is our version of the data. For various reasons, we were asked to include it with some analysis that we did that looked at geographic patterns. So we used this Census Bureau data that was over a longer time period. So it's actually from like the data vintage is from 2012 to 2016. So it's pretty dated at this point. We're working to update this now with the most recent census data, which I believe is for 2019. But essentially how this works, and it's more, you know, sort of thinking through what we're going to pull together for future meetings, is we look at the number of owners, you know, people who are owners in the census data, and we look at the number of owned units in the census data, and we sort of match those. We sort of identify what income level they match to. For the owner side, we use home values, not owner costs. On the rent side, we look at all of the renters, what their income is, all of the rented units and what they're renting for. And we sort of slot them into these categories, and we see kind of what's the balance. And you can see kind of below 30%, very steep gaps between the number of units that are available and the number of households that there are. So on the rental side, there's close to a 10,000 unit shortage for rental units that are affordable below 30% of the median income in the region. You know, we see that gap, you know, in the 30 to 50% of MFI for the renters as well, about 9,000 units. And then as you kind of move up the income spectrum, you see kind of where the excess capacity is in the 60 to 80% range, 80 to 100, 100 to 120. So these gaps, you know, on the up to 60% is, I think, one of the things driving this conversation. Before we move on, I just want to note, you know, in terms of our work at the planning department and how we think about kind of how our work relates to this broader affordability discussion. I do just want to note that more than 120% of the regional income, the deficit there is important. I don't think it's necessarily something for this group to grapple with and solve, but in terms of the work that we do, so much of which is new construction and comes in at higher rents, it's significant, because what it suggests is these are folks who are not cost burdened. These can afford, you know, pretty much what they can find, but because there's a deficit of units for them, they kind of cause havoc for folks further down the income level. So as they look for units, they look in the 100 to 120% range or the 80 to 100% range, and they can outbid everybody else. And maybe they fix it up, or they just, you know, they live with it for a little while and move on. But essentially they're putting pressure on prices further down the income level, which is, I think, one of the things driving our affordability crisis. So that's just sort of thinking about how our work relates to the work that this group is doing. Shifting there, there was some discussion in our last couple of meetings about zoning and kind of how we plan for and accommodate multifamily. So I wanted to give just a little bit of context on that. First off, it's important to remember we are a countywide government. We zone countywide, and that's a very large area at 525 square miles. About a third of that is rural, has a rural character that the current policy is that it should remain rural. And so we have agricultural zoning on about 193 square miles. However, the biggest group of zoning is zoning that supports residential development in one form or fashion. That's about 251 square miles. And I'm gonna break that down in a little bit more detail. So within those 251 square miles, just under half of that is zoned for single family only. 37% is available for single family or duplexes. And then 15% is multifamily supporting. That is only 15% of the residential land can you build multifamily on. And then I want to break that down even further because it gets some weird nuances. Within that 15%, which amounts to 37 square miles, 44% of the land is zoned for multifamily. If you are at all involved in rezoning issues, that's RM zoning. The rest of these are some form of mixed use, either office residential, genuine mixed use zones, or the downtown. And then what we call adaptive residential, where we said 10 or 15 years ago, essentially the council changed the rules so that most commercial districts on a major corridor or collector street can be used for residential. So what that means for the mixed use categories is that any new residential land is in competition with the commercial uses, which can drive up prices or make people reluctant to do mixed use zoning there or mixed use developments there. So that's just a little bit of context for the land use piece. The last thing that I have is something that is just very, very preliminary, very much a work in progress, where we're trying to put together a comprehensive, non-duplicative snapshot of our current supply of affordable units. And so what we're trying to put together is sort of the list of properties that are in some way subsidized so that they are income restricted. So we're not looking right now here at naturally occurring affordable housing. And so we've got kind of 3 lists that we're working to merge. There is some amount of overlap, and we're trying to sort through that. But essentially, Barnes and MDHA properties, as well as properties that received low-income housing tax credits. What our goal is to do is to put together a comprehensive list where we've weeded out the duplicates, and identified kind of what their expiration date is, so that in the next couple of weeks we can put together some sense of where are we going in the future with these? What is the supply in 5 years, and 10 years, and 15 years? And then tie that back to what are the funding trends that we have right now with the Barnes Fund or with low-income housing tax credit properties. On average, how many are they producing a year? And how does that compare as we look out 5 or 10 years? That seems like a useful baseline to understand kind of what the policy discussion is going forward. And so with that, I am happy to take questions or comments. If you've got very detailed follow-up or guidance on how to think about different parts of this, by all means, feel free to email me. Otherwise, I'm happy to discuss. Thank you.
You mentioned updating the gap on availability or need for affordable units. Do you know when you'll have that update available?
I don't, but I'm hoping that it's in the within the next week or two. Certainly, that's our goal. Having gone through it once before, I'm hoping that it's more straightforward to put together than it was last time.
Oh, that's faster than I thought.
Well, now I'm scared. That's our goal. We'll see what we can do.
I'm still gonna look and see and recognize hands that I've seen. I saw Kay, I saw your hand first, and then Dr. Beth Shin, I saw your hand right after.
Yes, Greg, going back to the wages in the Bureau of Labor Statistics data, which I go back and study a bit. And the last time I checked, I think it said that the median worker annual wage in Nashville was just under $39,000 a year. And so so that means half the workers in Nashville make less than that and half make more than that. So one of the things that I constantly look at is the ratio of what are people earning compared to what they can afford without being housing cost burden and rent, and what that is. And so many of us can do the math. Angie can do the math simply, and we know what that number is. It's about $800 a month. And then we look at the average rents. So those are just things that I just want to point out and that I look at. And then on back to the report that EPS or the Denver group did on the supply side gap where it looks like, yep, we have this deficit of housing supply for those at 120%. They spoke to that in the report. And so many of those are renting the units downstream, so to speak. They're renting the other units. And we don't know why. Some people project that it's because people are coming out of college with high debt and they really can't, they're trying to pay off debt, right? So they rent those units. So it doesn't mean that they can afford those housing costs at that level, but I just want people to be clear on that, and so their minds don't go in one of those directions that maybe leads you to an inaccurate conclusion. And then the third point, in your supply analysis between with the affordable units that you're trying to compile, I think we should include in there the HUD multifamily units, right, Angie? We need to have that in the mix.
Absolutely. That, and then clarification of what of MDHA you're looking at, because not only do they have their, the traditional public housing that converted to RAD, but then there's the home funded units. So, and then there's, and are you looking at where vouchers are? Yep. So there's multiple layers there within MDHA itself, but yeah, definitely the multifamily HUD, and you can get that from THDA.
Yep. So utilize Angie and she'll direct you to the right place.
Yep. Thank you.
Dr. Shin?
Returning to the gaps analysis, if you would, wanted to make one observation that the problem is worst at the bottom at below 30% of area median. Folks experiencing homelessness are down around 10% of area median. So I think we really need to focus there. And also you mentioned that the folks who are a little better off were renting cheaper units, and that pressure certainly happens at the very bottom as well. So the people who could afford 80 to 100% might be down at 30 to 50%. In some cases, people just don't want to move. If they've got a unit, it's a good deal, they'll stay there. The National Low Income Housing Coalition tries to look at availability as well as affordability to take account of those folks that are renting in cheaper units. Can you do that as well in Nashville?
I'm certainly happy to take a look. If you can point me to a write-up where they kind of talk through that, I'm happy to see what we can do.
That was a great point, Dr. Shin. Kelsey, I see your hand is up.
Greg, I'm curious about that 48% of residential zoning that's single family only. Do you have a sense of how much of that has been downzoned in the last several years?
I don't. Some certainly, but I don't think it's like in terms of a percentage. I don't know that it's a huge amount. Maybe a couple percent. But certainly in terms of acreage, it could be significant.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and as well as Dr. Shin, I see that your hands are both raised. If you don't have further questions, would you lower your hands, please? I saw another hand, but it seems to have gone down. So I'm not sure if that was somebody waiting to speak. So if it was, please put your hand back up. But I do see Lethia's hand just went up. So Lethia.
Yes, I was looking at some data too that THDA prepared, and they look at 4 cities. It's the THDA housing indicators comparing Tennessee's top 4 cities, and so by population. And so look, Memphis, Nashville, Knoxville, and Chattanooga. It's on their website. But the share of single family homes valued at less than $100,000. In Memphis, they state 62%, Knoxville 49%, Chattanooga 38%, and Nashville 6%. So that to me is amazing. Really, I think Memphis might be a little high, but Nashville, only 6% of the homes they say are valued at less than $100,000.
No, absolutely. I actually took a look at that exact same thing. I think the data for Memphis is probably a little outdated, and I would agree with you. But you're right, being down near 5 or 6% for our entire city area is pretty tough in terms of those who need housing, and creating that underserved population just really being taxed. Marshall, I see your hand is up, sir. Would you go ahead?
So have we looked at the data and done some comparison to the aging of the housing stock? I know that preservation is one of the committees that we're going to break into. So have we done any, or have we taken a look at the data as it relates to, the aging of the housing stock comparative to the new housing stock?
We have not done that yet, but I know that we have that, so I'm happy to pull it together.
And hey, Greg, maybe I don't have the exact information, but I'm sure either Mick or myself can figure out who a good contact is. Rebuilding Together actually took a look at that exact data about maybe 18 months ago. And so, again, it will have at least a good starting point for you. So I'll follow up with you after this about that information.
That'd be great.
I currently don't see any other hands raised. Okay, I see your hand just went up.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in and make a request.
And then after that, I see Angie.
Another segment of data that's going to be needed at some point around preservation is a document that shows when the affordability restrictions burn off, because you need that in order to prepare for preserving those in the future. So I don't know if Greg would do that now or how that would come about. It's just data that's going to be needed.
And just to jump in, Kay, Jeremy from THDA shared that data with us earlier, so we'll make sure that Greg has that if he doesn't have it already. But that was for the LIHTC property. The other side is the Section 8, which THDA should also have, and some of it's listed on some of the national websites too. But
yeah, and the HUD projects, the HUD guaranteed loans, those also.
Okay.
Thank you.
There's also a national housing preservation database that exists where it lists all the LIHTC properties and maps it out. And so I think we could look there too.
Perfect. Thank you.
Angie, I saw your hand, and then Jeremy, I see yours. Yours may be related to the current topic, but Angie, I saw your hand first.
Thanks, Ed. I think I would like to see, back to Marshall's request on the age of housing stock, overlaid with, I guess the districts or however they're laid out where property taxes have increased. Because I think that those two things combined can show us hot areas, places at risk for displacement.
Yeah, Jeremy, did you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I was. I pulled up the age of housing stock for Davidson County, and it's probably the same information you guys were referencing earlier from our housing profiles on the 5-year run. Built before 1960, 22%. Built between 69 and 60 is 14%. 79 to 70 is 15%. 89 to 80 is 16%. 99 to 90 is 12%, and built 2000 or later is 22%. So the median year built is 1980.
Thanks for that, Jeremy. And I'm sure that's something we can get access to for reference as we break into our committees.
And Greg, one thing that I think is a nice counterpoint to some of the data, the census data that we rely on for this information is more market-based data. So it's one thing to ask people what they're currently paying in rent. Another thing is what would it cost to rent that same unit today if they went onto apartments.com and saw it, which are generally, there's a huge gap between those two numbers often. Similarly, on the ownership market too, what people are saying their homes are worth and what's actually out there on the MLS today. If you saw something that was affordable to 30% of income on a realtor had listed, I don't think it would last very long, or 50% in general. So I think that's a nice counterpoint to actually talk about the lived experience of someone in the middle of a housing search right now, which in many ways is, I think, what we're all most focused on.
And it's something we're constantly looking for, kind of what market data can we incorporate. So we'll see, there's a couple of things I have in mind that we might be able to bring in to sort of see how that compares, like how those levels differ depending on the data source. So I'm happy to build in what we can. And I apologize, y'all. I've got two screens, so y'all are on this screen, so I keep looking to the side. But my actual notes are here.
No worries. I don't see, Jeremy, I see your hand is still up. I don't know if you wanted to chime in again, but I don't see any other questions. Thanks for that, Jeremy. I don't see any other questions popping up right now. So, Greg, I thank you for the time spent. I know this was a definite crash course for you, and of course, thank Nick as well for the time spent pulling this together so we can review that this week. And again, it sounds like there'll be some more information added, and we've already highlighted a few other things where we need research. And we definitely want to spend our time focusing more and more on gathering the data to better empower our committees. At this point, and Mick, I don't know if you want to take the reins here or not, but we do want to dive more into our committee assignments and then some of the processes for the task force moving forward. You all should have a memo that was shared with you earlier today for reference. Let's see here, and I'm looking for it myself. I had it up and I started taking notes also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I could put up the PowerPoint if that would be helpful. I'm not sure that if I could have sharing ability, I can start walking through that process if folks would have that. And just as a note while that's happening, this isn't the last day we'll talk about data needs. As we work in our committees and questions come up, we'll have the chance to delve a little bit further into it. So I'm going to quickly run through this, and but basically, let's see. Are you guys seeing my screen?
Yes.
Great. Excellent. So we're going to have two committees, as was mentioned, one focusing on the creation of affordable housing, one focused on the preservation of affordable housing. And a quick breakdown there. I think that's listed in the memo that you have there, so I won't run through it. I'm not sure if we broke down if you guys have seen what committees you've been assigned to just yet. I don't recall if that information has gone out or not, so I'm going to put it up right now so you guys can digest. Thank you everybody for putting your preferred committee and potential availability. We hope that this all works for everyone. If it doesn't, please let us know. We do want to accommodate and ensure the high level of participation. So that's the quick breakdown there, and you'll get a meeting invite probably early next week in regard to all of that. So that's the breakdown of our two committees. And I believe that they will be public. And if you're interested in the conversation going on in the other committee, you'll certainly be able to participate, watch as an attendee. And if you are wanting to spend time talking about both, please let us know. If you have that kind of availability. That's great from my book. So that's the quick assignment breakdowns, and then I'm going to jump to the next slide, which has what things are looking like over the next several weeks. So I think we've done a really good job, or done some really important process of starting off week one, intros. That was an important part of this all, talking about obstacles as a big old group, and now focusing on data. And then next week and the next 4 weeks, and if we can do it in 3 or if we can do it in 2, that's great. And we will adjust as appropriate. But we do want to make sure we have enough time as our individual committees to select. Each committee is going to have a chair and a vice chair, and they're going to have a chance to review the data, ask for more, identify and prioritize obstacles. I think a lot of these obstacles, as we were talking about earlier, we can see the interrelationships between them, and then we might want to redefine them and work them and prioritize them after doing that, because there's a lot of things out there, there's a lot of complexity and a lot of relationships between them. And then we'll get into the important work of finding meaningful solutions that have the biggest possible impact. We may want to prioritize some of those. We do want to focus on what we can get started in the near term, next 1 to 3 years. And then also, while we're doing that, we may want to identify some of those longer term solutions. Then we're gonna.
And hey, Mick, I'll jump in here. I think this is when we talk about where everybody's been assigned. Yeah. Right, and we do want to be mindful of everyone on the task force time and the time they devote to this service. Don't feel left out. You'll see when we get into what's shown on the chart in front of you, weeks 8 through 10. You will have a chance to review the other committee's work, right? And so you will be a part of the process through and through. We're just breaking into smaller groups so that we can tackle things more in depth. Divide and conquer, for lack of a better term, and then also, taking on the approach of the iron sharpens iron. So, we'll have a lot of really good conversations in that committee work group, and then you will, of course, as Mick said, have the opportunity to garner that information, whether you want to go back and watch the videos on your own time, reach out to Mick or myself, and see how things are going. But there will be updates that are shared throughout that time frame. And then we're going to do kind of an exchange, right? And you'll be able to look at how things have gone with the other group, lean in heavily. Again, we do want to adopt those changes in a consensus, format. So we do want everyone to coalesce on what we believe are our solutions that we recommend in the implementation strategy. And then we'll vote. We'll have a vote. We will have a democratic approach, so that we will vote on what those final agendas are. I think it'll be a really good sense of, we divided you guys up and we put you back together again. We'll see how if the puzzle pieces all align very well. I've enjoyed the conversation today because there's definitely some areas of strong feelings about what we need to be taking on. And so really want to see how that shakes out when we get more information. After that, again, we will all come together in this big unified group. And we'll do what we've done somewhat today, but on the back end of the process, right? We'll fully review all of our recommendations. We'll dive into things, and we'll be able to have a little bit of spirited debate if we need it about coalescing our agenda, and then we'll have that final vote that I talked about. And then we will wrap up with the presentation to Mayor Cooper. He's highlighted each of us for our respective reasons, and then we'll have an opportunity to present our work there. And then one thing that we did touch on a little bit earlier was the public release. Again, it'll likely become public right after or right during the time we present to the mayor, but just allocating a time for the public to digest exactly what all we've done. And we wanted to put this in front of you all so that you have the lay of the land moving forward. As Mick said, this is a guide for which we will operate from, so that everyone has a uniform and identified plan. But we will work expeditiously. So if there are areas where we can move more quickly, we will. But also, if there's times where we need to spend and have more in-depth conversation, this schedule allows for that. I don't want to I don't want to give the awkward silence any definition, but we do have time for folks to react to that. So if you do have any initial thoughts.
And let me, and I see your hand up, Kay. And I just want to say one more thing. I think I'm just really excited about getting to the dialogue portion of this. The amount of great people and expertise sitting around this table. We haven't really, with the groups kind of been a little bit too cumbersome to have a back and forth, a dynamic conversation. So I personally am looking forward to bringing the insights of all of you a little bit more and constant together. So I'm excited about that and very optimistic about that. But Kay, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to go back to what John covered with us at the beginning. And yes, we're going to be coming up with recommendations, but even as important as that is, we're going to be coming up with a framework. And so I want us to keep that in mind, because how do the pieces of the framework together? And what does it take to have glue to keep the pieces of the framework together? That's, I think, is critical to any success, is to think in that way. Recommendations are great, but I think in terms of having a framework and that we can get excitement around and take out to the broader community, because they'll want to see this, and I think that's important for us. So that's how I'm looking at it, building the frame and having the glue to keep the frame together so we can keep moving forward. Thank you.
No, well said, Kay. I appreciate that. Councilmember Allen, I see your hands up. You wanted to speak.
Great, thank you. I want to build on what Kay said. I mean, I think at some points in the past year, this has been then referred to or maybe conflated with a 10-year housing plan, which I think a number of housing advocates have been asking for years. And my hope is that we can, as Kay said, build a framework that says, you know, here's the problem we've identified, here's the data, and here are the partners that can fill in each of these pieces. You know, for the 30%, 0 to 30% AMI, all the way up to the 120, it's going to be different groups doing different pieces of it. My hope is that we end up with honest to goodness action items and entities that we have assigned those actions to. MDHA, you're going to have to do this. We're going to create the path for it. Nonprofits, this is your niche. We're going to create or remove the obstacles so you can do more. And for-profit builders, y'all may be the ones doing the work for us on the top of it. And here's legislation we're going to pass to make it happen. So I know we have to be realistic and acknowledge that we can't do it all next year. So I think there's real value in the 3-year piece of it, but I hope that we will be bold and talk about, you know, a long range 10-year plan with metrics, you know, and ways to gauge our success, and very specifically point to who's going to be implementing those pieces of it, so that we can then, you know, and maybe even set in place the framework, you know, to have somebody check back on a yearly basis. I you know, have a resolution that I passed 2 years ago for a housing dashboard, but it wasn't an ordinance. So it's still kind of messing around and it hasn't happened yet. But maybe if this group wants to make that part of what we call for, great. If not, I'm going to change my resolution to an ordinance so that we actually do have something that shows, you know, this is the housing that's being built. So I press for being bold. Let's say everything that needs to happen and then prioritize, you know, and put that at the beginning as our 3-year piece of it. But I want to spell out all the tools that should be possible. So, you know, if somebody decides to grab one and run with it before we got to it, great. So anyway, let's be bold. Thanks.
And I just want to second that, Councilmember Allen. I think that's the right way to think about things. That's how we're thinking about things. And we want not only recommendations for Metro, but a framework that we can plug other players in the city into. And I think it's very clear there needs to be a measurement component of that. So thumbs up on your approach.
Absolutely. I saw your hand go up, Marshall. Would you go ahead?
And so although we're thinking about this, and, you know, I love what the council person, council person said, about how we structure this, but how do we politicize this as well from a political standpoint? We have had, I think I've been here for what, 3.5 years, and we've had 3 different plans prior to this. But then once one mayor leaves, then we're creating a whole nother plan that go. So how do we create something that not just a mayor's office owns, but the entities or the industries that are involved in this take ownership to this as well, so that the political beings that are involved in it do not hold it as, I don't want to take on because that was someone else's plan. So how do we structure it and put a framework around it that we're able to move forward with this regardless of who is in office?
I'll lean in here, and I know, John, you probably should be the best person to speak on that. But in my personal opinion, right, not speaking on behalf of any other entity, my personal opinion is very similar to what you articulated, Marshall. Is it's empowering others, right, to understand what their part is and their responsibility is, and our task force responsibility of laying out that framework, as I think it was articulated previously, so that we're moving and going forward no matter what. I mean, we understand the challenge has been the same challenge and it's just continually been exacerbated over the past decade. So, the team of people that we have here in our respective networks and organizations, we just need to be empowered, and here's our chance to really say what we need. And then we'll be able to carry that banner and that torch far into the future, regardless of particular leadership in particular institutions.
Yeah, and I have 2 thoughts on that. First, I think that there is an appetite among everyone involved in this to have solutions which are very specific and focused. In talking with Hannah about this, and those of you who've spoken with her know this, she's not looking for a general recommendation. She really wants to find solutions that we can move forward with now. And I think the second answer to that question is, this is, you are developing recommendations for Mayor Cooper, but this is an incredible group. You have expertise and authority, and part of the way that you, I think, have buy-in to a framework is to come up with a really compelling framework. We are here to support your work in that effort, and Mayor Cooper very much wants your ideas and your analysis, and he wants to understand what the problems are and how we meet those problems. So I think that the quality of the work will be a large part of what establishes this as a framework going forward. Although we do hope to be around for a bit.
I see Council Member Suar. Would love to recognize you.
Thank you. As we're talking about the framework, I know I've looked at the housing plan, the last one that was done, and there were some recommendations that I thought were great, and I've always wondered why they were never carried out. And I wonder if, as we look into our committees, whether it's worthwhile to look at some of those recommendations so we're not reinventing some of the wheels, see why those did not work out, why we did not move forward with them, so that we're not coming up with the same thing that is not practical. I don't know if it helps at all, but I do know that those were put forward, and some of them were very good, and some of them are similar to what we've been talking about. So I don't know, just a thought in my head, it's not even a suggestion, but I'm thinking that if there's a way to look at the work that's been done prior and see how we can build on it to come up with a better thing than what was in the past. Just thought I will throw that out there.
I think that's a great idea, and I think both of our committees should focus on, okay, what's already been suggested, why hasn't it happened, what needs to happen, and in order to make it happen if it should have happened already. I think that's a great thing. We don't need to reinvent the wheel, and I also hope that we come up with some maybe novel combinations of ideas that may be more successful than those proposed before, and maybe it's just putting another amplifier behind the great ideas that have been already mentioned, and together we can all help make this happen. But I would say for all of us, just because an idea has been proposed before doesn't mean it's stale or bad.
Yeah, and I would just say in terms of the House Nashville work, because I was on the housing committee, and I think Nick, I don't know how many years we worked on that thing, but we came out with some very specific actionable items. But, you know, the purpose of that is to make recommendations, to turn it into an operational plan. It takes action by others and resources behind those actions. And with the other reports, they weren't really plans, they were more reports that came out in 2017. Again, it was a report. To operationalize the report takes identification of what has to be done and what resources need to be put behind it and how those resources are going to be acquired to do it. So those were the steps that were not taken after those, and that's where all of us have to be engaged to try to help make that happen, and that includes, you know, our partners with Metro government, which is why we're here today. You know, he pulled us together for a reason. But that's you know, they were reports with specific recommendations, but there was no plan to operationalize them with the money behind it and the people.
In that sense, then if there were still suggestions there that are great, like Mick said, we can take those suggestions and then we put the operations and put the framework behind it.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
That's great. I don't see any other hands. I think as Kay said and as Sean put eloquently beforehand, you know, we were all selected for a reason, right? We were all put here because of things we've done before this moment. So there's no desire for any of us to start from scratch. We want to make sure we take all of the collective experiences that we have, provide our entire task force with the most current and relevant information that we can, and then leverage each other in our collective networks as we move forward. As we begin to approach the end of our time today, I wanted to just make sure that everyone does understand that the procedure beginning next week will be that there will be 2 separate meetings. You will be in your committee. One of those committees, which is preserving affordable housing units, will be from noon or 12 o'clock until 1:30 p.m. Thanks for bringing that back up, just so you guys can, you know, take a screenshot or just, you know, write it down in your notebook. But there will be a calendar invite that is sent, very similar to the one you received for this evening, that has a link to a WebEx, and those will also be recorded, just so that everyone is aware of that process. So keep your eyes out on your inbox for that. And as Mick and I shared, you know, we plan to work in duality, so we plan to the best of our ability, attend both meetings. We do offer that to anyone else on the committee to at least, you know, see, observe, whether you watch it later, because it will be recorded. But we just feel that's just the best thing that we can do as co-chairs and leadership for this task force, and we intend to do that, as well as continue to make ourselves a resource for you all throughout the process. Mick, I don't know if you want to say any parting words, or John, if I need to turn it back over to you in terms of closing this evening. But I definitely want to thank everyone for what I would consider a very successful meeting. And again, to Greg and Nick for pulling together that amount of information in such a short period of time. I know you devoted what are already limited resources in our planning department to further empower this group. And so just want to further extend that appreciation.
I've got nothing else to add, Ed. I'll try and give everyone a couple more minutes if they can of their evening. But thank you so much, and really excited to get into the work even in more detail next week. John?
Great job.
I just want to say thank you as well. I appreciate it. Excited to break into committees, and want to thank Greg and Nick and everyone at planning for, you know, what they're doing. It's great. It's great to have numbers.
It is.
Ed, could we have the PowerPoint that Greg showed us?
I need to add in a few notes, but that I was planning to share it with everyone.
Thank you.
And I think maintain something as a common resource going forward.
Okay, thanks so much.
And I'll further add to that. I think one thing that would be good is, we've had a lot of conversation these last few moments about previous plans. I think it would be good to also present those to the entire task force. So we'll work to gather those and share those as well.
That'd be great. Yes, and the links.
Edward, I think on that last note, I think it's going to be important for folks to understand that in addition to those plans, if there's specific research around solutions that work in other cities that we should be looking at here in Nashville, we will want those. So there will be an email coming to you all opening up the opportunity, if you are tracking those data, if you are tracking that evidence-based research, that we would welcome your recommendations on those fronts. So thank you very much, everyone.
Yeah. And on that note, thank you to those who've already shared information with us, and we'll make sure that they are shared with the committee. So thank you to many of you who've already shared a whole bunch of great info. So we'll make sure that's distributed.
Okay.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Good night, all.
Everyone. We'll move to adjourn.